If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, Juneteenth is significant because it commemorates sacrifice. Sacrifice is the most worthy reason to mark something as a holiday. Sacrifice is the highest and the best reason to declare something a holiday. I'll explain why later. Now, not to toot our own horns, but only the right stuff made it out of the living hell of slavery in the United States. Our ancestors, and we who are their descendants, are a peculiar people. We are not better than the rest of the black diaspora, but we have our own unique experience, which is part of a greater whole. We are not better than the rest of the global family, but there's a reality there that must be acknowledged. As Dr. Runoko Rashidi put it, black people are a global people. And there were more Africans who were sent to South America than North America. There's Africans who went to many nations and put down roots. But there was no civil rights movement outside of the United States. There was no civil rights movement in Mexico, or Brazil, or Cuba, or in Britain. There were some demonstrations, but a demonstration is not a movement. All of the so-called liberation activities that have happened in Britain, Latin America, the Caribbean, India, Australia, and Canada, they have all referred to us and what we did here. We served as both inspiration and a model for all of the liberation struggles that would come after us, and all liberation struggles to be. The strongest and most sustained liberation struggle in human history has been taking place right here in the United States. This is why all others reference our icons like Malcolm, and they compare themselves to the Black Panthers and Dr. King. Even people who didn't come from our FBA DAS background were elevated to the level of icons because of us. People like Marcus Garvey and Stokely Carmichael. They were from the Caribbean, but they got no support in their home countries. Now, many of them will try to say that they came to the United States because the United States is the richest country on earth. Maybe, but the United States didn't give any of that wealth to us. And when they were fighting for their own liberation, they didn't go and seek out white support. They came and sought us out, even though we didn't have any resources to give them. So why did all the freedom fighters from abroad come here, to us? They were forced to come here because this is the only place on the planet that had the fire. We accepted the reality that it's not where you're from, it's where you're at. And that became the tie that bound us together. We drew and continue to draw strength and encouragement from one another. We understood that we have spiritual and cultural common ground. Now this brings us to another point. There are two crucial elements that we have to get if we're going to take our rightful place on the world stage. Many point out that we are not united. First of all, most groups are not united, not in the way that most people use the word. All groups have a number of leaders who set the tone for everyone else. Now, in our case, we're not talking about one person who everybody looks to. We're talking about individuals who control resources. The code is the leader. But you absolutely must have resources if you're going to promote and maintain that code. That means you have to become a living embodiment of the code. You have to be in a position to decide who eats and who doesn't eat. Most human behavior can be readily influenced, if not outright controlled, depending on who someone gets their daily bread from. For 15 years, I've said the reason we have all this off-kilter, dirtbag backstabbing, everyone just doing whatever they want to do, is because most black people know that they can be off code and still eat the next day. That's why having control of resources is important. It puts the right black people in a position to decide who gets to eat, and you're able to attach actual consequences to being off code. But there's also another problem: how to organize that group behavior. Dr. John Henrik Clarke said that we must decide that we are too proud to live in slums. You can put resources into people's hands, but if they have a Pookie and Ray Ray mentality, they'll simply use the money to buy large speakers and blast music day and night. They'll have cars in their front yards. The children will be loud and unruly. The women will be trifling and ignorant. The men will be shiftless and unproductive. In other words, you'll have a place that isn't pleasant to live and never builds anything. That's where the code of conduct comes in. As TBA said, a code of conduct is when we all know what is in our interest, but, as I added, we all act accordingly. So a code of conduct is when we all know what's in our interest and we act accordingly. Part of a code of conduct is that it must be enforced. Enforcement and defense are one and the same. When a code is not enforced, then a group or a society will degenerate to whatever the lowest common denominator is. Whomever the least intelligent, least motivated, most ignorant portion of your group is, they will drag everyone else down to their level because no one's making it clear that that won't be tolerated. So having a code of conduct is not enough, it must also be enforced. That was what our brother Malcolm meant when he said black nationalism means we control the economics and the politics of the areas in which we live. Economics means distribution of resources. Politics means who makes the rules. The one relies upon the other. Economics without politics produces nothing that lasts. Politics without economics is just wishful thinking. But there was also something else Malcolm said. We cannot think of being acceptable to others until we have first learned to be acceptable to one another. This, in a nutshell, is the core of many of the internal dilemmas that we have amongst ourselves. We must call out the dysfunction that plagues us and then purge it ruthlessly. That's where the code of conduct comes in. Unlike the African diaspora, our loyalty system here has been confused because we have bootlicks and sellouts sent amongst us by our oppressors. But our loyalty system has not been broken. In Africa and the Caribbean, it has been broken. They can't trust each other and don't want to. That's why tribalism is so rampant there. Everyone divides themselves, not along the lines of nationality, but along the lines of their particular tribe or ethnic group. They have no sense of we, merely a narrow concept of ours. They face a common enemy, but even now they refuse to make common cause with one another. The factionalism and tribalism they've practiced for so long is the very thing that put them in the sorry state they're in now, but they still won't let go of it. Our problem is that we live in a country that we do not own or control. A country that has waged relentless war on us for 500 years. A country that has determined that we will never be allowed to build a black power base. As a result, we are denied the basic building blocks that a community needs simply so it can exist. We don't control where we live, how we get our daily bread. We can't stop outsiders from attacking us, and we don't have a mechanism to handle troublemakers from within. How do we change that? First, we focus on it. By focusing on ourselves. Each and every one of us is a cell within the black body politic. And as with all bodies, there are some cells that are healthy and active, others that are diseased and or cancerous, and there are others that are just dead. And then there are the cells whose purpose it is to protect the body against diseased cells. You are a cell in the black body politic. Make it your mission to be a healthy cell, to become a strong cell. We don't need untold millions to get the job done. It's never the masses that get things done. It's a dedicated, die-hard few. Consider this. As more black people get on code and begin the process of fortifying and strengthening themselves, they'll begin talking to one another. They begin automatically seeking one another out. That's a natural process of growth. But a black person with no strength will be of limited use to the cause. That's not to say that they are of no use. Every one of us can do something, from putting money on something to organizing at the grassroots to spreading the word. But I would like to give you a note of caution about that last one. If all you're going to do is spread the word, then the only way you can claim that you're being useful is if you're spreading the word day in and day out, like it's your job, in every different place that you can. I'm serious about that. Someone who merely says something every once in a while, they're not spreading the word. They're just giving lip service. But there's more to it than that. Victory often comes down to a matter of inches, tiny things that no one considered. One person who could have made all the difference. If you're the right black person in the right place at the right time, but you lack whatever resource or wherewithal the group needs you to have, then we will have missed a chance to win a victory. So each of us needs to have strength. You don't know when the moment will come when everything is going to depend on you, but I'm telling you that moment's going to come, and when it does, you have to be ready. If you're truly serious about black empowerment, then you already understand why it must be this way. If you want to be part of a group of people who are seeking power, then you have to understand it is inevitably the task of the weaker partner to adjust to the demands of a relationship. Power makes demands of us. If you want it, then there are requirements necessary to acquire it, and each and every one of us have to act like we're serious about it. The reason white power is finally pretending to engage on reparations is because of the conversations at the grassroots. We've made it clear that our vote is going to be attached to tangibles specifically for us, and we did it in a voice loud enough to be heard. Now they want to take the momentum that we've gained and turn it against us, try to convince us that they're going to go in the direction that we demand, but all along they plan to slowly guide and mislead us around in one big circle until we wind up right back where we started. That's why we see cities and even states saying some things about reparations, and the federal government makes Juneteenth a federal holiday as if we needed their permission. Or as if somehow this is some sort of grand concession. As Dr. John Henry Clark said, you do not ever make a demand of your enemy that does not require him to give up his power. The white government giving themselves a paid federal holiday, that doesn't require them to give up anything at all. However, we have the sellouts and bootlicks like the Congressional Black Talkers who are trying to say that this is some sort of victory for us. And because too many of us are looking for validation from the dominant society, we'll be so desirous to believe that maybe, just maybe, massa finally loves us, that we'll actually play along with being conned. A people who act and think for themselves don't do that. Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen said it best, you do not ask the white government for a holiday, you take a day. One of the worst mistakes that we made was integration. We integrated ourselves right out of what little power we'd managed to aggregate for ourselves, and ever since then we've been fighting to be accepted at someone else's schools, someone else's theaters and restaurants, and then we wonder why we don't have any of our own. We made our black culture and our black economy into nothing more than a subsidiary of the dominant society. So our dollars, our creativity, our talent goes to power the very machine that oppresses us. Refusing to think and act for yourself is not a victimless crime. In fact, refusing to think is the very antithesis of what we are. Our people here, we who survived the hells of slavery in the United States, we are a contemplative people. You cannot build what we've built or accomplish what we have without deep thought. Juneteenth resonates with us because we developed and nurtured the idea that we are all in this together. Regardless of where we came from, we are here now. We embraced and cultivated a black identity that crossed all regional, religious, and financial lines. We understood that so long as white power held any of us in its grip, none of us were free. Juneteenth is not a regional anything. It is a national holiday with us and has been long before the Democrats decided they were going to pretend to finally acknowledge it. See, we don't believe in leaving anyone behind. That's why so many other groups keep running to us whenever they get their behinds in a crack. In these other groups, these migrants, it's everyone for themselves. So they can't depend on each other for anything. They leave one another behind all the time. That's how so many of them came to be over here. They want our support, but it's simply so that they can get something for themselves. We don't operate like that. We are a peculiar people indeed. We stand on principle, but no culture can endure without resources to undergird it. Not everyone is cut out for black empowerment. Power is constantly in the process of refining itself. That means losing dead weight. Let's be honest. Do you think that every slave in Galveston didn't know that the Emancipation Proclamation had been passed? Do you think that every slave in Galveston wanted to be free? How many of them were collaborators with the plantation owners? How many of them heard that they were finally free and yet wished that they could go back to the big house. Better yet, how many of those former slaves in Galveston would have gladly betrayed the majority just to get a better place under Massa? When you think about Juneteenth, you see that, as Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, all history is a current event. But not all history is the same, and it doesn't mean the same to everyone either. For some of us, that history has a depth and meaning that goes beyond the event itself. When we honor our past, we honor ourselves. That's why we make it a point to celebrate the moment when the very last of us broke the chains of bondage, and make no mistake, we broke them. Setbacks will happen, losses will be sustained on the road to power, but a loss does not become a defeat until you choose to give up. If we take an L, so what? We are dedicated to this course of action. Black people ran away from the plantations the second they locked us up there. Some escaped and formed enclaves like the Maroons. Those who couldn't escape staged revolts and uprisings on the plantations, and no matter how many failed, they kept at it. Generation after generation, eventually century after century. 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, 300 years, however long it takes. That's what Juneteenth is truly about. It's not us commemorating an event. It is a distinct and unique people commemorating a process of which Juneteenth was merely the beginning. We will not be deprived of our physical freedom, our rights, our dignity, or our power. We will not be deprived of our rightful place in history either, and we're going to be the ones who write that chapter. Not Joe Biden or the Democrats, not the white media, not the congressional black talkers. It will be us. Just because white power is trying to manufacture its own Juneteenth bandwagon so that they can jump on it, that doesn't diminish the holiday one iota or mean that we should abandon it. What it means is we have to put our foot down and make it clear this is ours, and we will define it. As I've always told you, when we fight, we win. We must remember our history because history is the living memory of a people. We must remember what we have overcome and cherish those who fought those battles, because that adversity and our prevailing over it proves the kind of steel we're made of. No, nobody's going to take our holy days from us. Now, at the beginning of this Sunday address, I told you that sacrifice is the highest and best reason to declare something a holiday, and I meant that quite literally. The word sacrifice comes from two Latin words, sacer, which means holy, and officium, which means to make or to do. So the word sacrifice literally means to make holy. And by that definition, we, our ancestors, and our history are uniquely sacred and holy indeed. Every sacrifice our ancestors were forced to make, including the sacrifices they chose to make, every burden they were forced to bear, all the pain they endured, it was not for nothing. You and I are the proof of that. Juneteenth is one of the holiest of days in our calendar, and it should be. The blood, sweat, pain, and tears suffered by our ancestors made this day holy. It falls to us to keep it that way. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Mouse, Melvinia Miles, Curtis Fitzgerald, Rebellious Zoe, and Starlet Thompson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.